Chargers wide receiver Keenan Allen has been getting a lot of slack after a down season, but even at his age, we're getting bold today, and I think he's about to have one of his best seasons ever.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Drogemeyer, and we've been covering the Chargers together for 7 seasons, but this is our 5th season as a host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you guys so much for making this your first listen today, and to make sure you never miss the show, go subscribe or follow for free on YouTube and listen wherever you get your podcast from. And it's Fan Mail Friday, and we're getting bold today. We'll get into the voicemail that inspired my bold Keenan Allen take, because I think he is getting slept on a little bit, especially with all the talk of new receivers and off of a down season for him. I think there's still a lot left in the gas tank, and we're also going to talk about, would we trade Mike Williams straight up for DeAndre Hopkins, and if Kellen Moore should be standing on the sideline or in the booth when he's calling plays, as well as if he could potentially take over for Brandon Staley. It's a question that we've gotten a lot. And we also have a lot of fun voicemails, including some behind-the-scenes questions about what we do and what goes into the show every day. But today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. Have you ever dreamed of becoming an NFL GM and managing your own football franchise? Then this is the game that's definitely for you. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com to look it up on the app stores, or listeners can get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code LOCKEDON, all caps, in the game. David, I know that kind of sounds like it's crazy coming out of nowhere and just saying, hey, Keenan Allen's about to have one of his best seasons yet, but we decided we'd get a little bold today at this part of the season before the draft, and we'll get into, bold predictions later on. But it was inspired by our friend Atir, who I guess the 13-4 prediction wasn't bold enough last week. He has something even crazier this week.
Dan, David, so you want to doubt my prediction about Chargers 13-4? Well, you can take this one. Staley, Coach of the Year. Telesco, GM of the Year. Herbert, MVP. Chargers winning the Super Bowl. Let's go, FTR.
I love how he wraps it up with a little FTR for all the Raiders fans out there. Family, trust, and respect. I don't know if I think that a GM of the Year, I don't know if, is that a thing? I don't know. But
maybe Executive of the Year?
Yeah, Executive of the Year. I'm sure there's something like that. But
yeah,
Coach of the Year, that might be the wildest of those takes. And the Chargers have never won a Super Bowl. So, Atir, I appreciate your boldness, and you've inspired us to have our own bold takes, including mine, which is, David, I think the Chargers fans have been sleeping a lot on Keenan Allen, wanting him cut, saying he's washed up, coming off of a down season where a hamstring basically nuked his entire year. We'll talk about nuke later on, but I don't think it's crazy to think he could have a comeback year, especially after what I saw from him on a game-by-game basis last year, after seeing how well he rebounded early in his career, obviously much younger from some of the injuries he had then, and I just don't think it's crazy. I think Keenan Allen could go 17 games, 1,300 yards, 100 catches, and 8 touchdowns this season. If we're going to go bold at this point of the year, you got to go bold.
Let's go, baby. But the thing is I can see that potentially happening. And the reason why I have said many, many times throughout many shows, throughout the years, that I feel like Keenan Allen's game is timeless. He is over 30 years old, still an incredibly phenomenal route runner, just some of the best releases in the game, really, really strong hands, and he's been used to access the deeper part of the field a little bit last year, and I think that's a trend that's going to continue on going forward, especially under Kellen Moore, which is something that could make those numbers definitely come true.
Yeah, I definitely think so too. I mean, and I love that you wore the Keenan Allen jersey out of respect, but yeah, I mean, he's still Herbert's favorite weapon. He's headed into his age 31 season, I get it, but in 8 healthy games last year where he played all the way through, he averaged 7.5 catches and 84 receiving yards in those games. Obviously, you have to stay healthy, but if you span that out, that's a 1,400-yard season, 127 catches, and 8 touchdowns, which would be his best season ever. When he was out there last year, he made a big difference. Where are you going for your bold prediction, though?
Yeah, so my bold prediction here is going to be someone doing something that Khalil Mack did in 2016, which was win the Defensive Player of the Year award, and that person is going to be Derwin James. I think this is the year for Derwin James that he puts it all together and they really unleash the animal that is Derwin James. I'm going 120 tackles, 8.5 sacks, and 7 interceptions for DJ. He's going to be all over the football field, and he is going to be a just straight up Tasmanian devil, getting crazy, crazy stat numbers. He is capable of it. I think it's going to happen this year. That is my bold prediction. Let's go, DJ.
Wow, I mean, that's very bold for sure, and we'll have more stuff like that. I mean, those two guys are hard to pick against, and I think are hugely, critical in what the Chargers end up doing in 2023. First safety to win it since 2010 when Troy Polamalu won it. I mean, it is one of those positions, kind of like winning MVP as a running back, right? Like,
yeah.
The sexy pick is going to be an edge rusher with 18 sacks, right?
Right.
It's going to be a corner with 10 interceptions potentially or something like that, or maybe a linebacker like Luke Kuechly back in the day, right?
Yeah.
But a tier. We appreciate your boldness, and you inspired us to go a little bit bold today. Hopefully we're, living up to your lofty standards of us. We know you're an everydayer. We appreciate you, and we love hearing your voice, and we know that you love us. But we do have more questions to get into, and I want to talk about this one from Brandon Mitchell on YouTube, who asks, would you trade Mike Williams for DeAndre Hopkins? I know a lot of fans have entertained the notion of potentially having all three of those guys with Keenan Allen included in that, and just having like three $30+ million wide receivers. But let's start with this and just say, okay, we're taking salary caps aside, right?
Yeah.
Both guys have huge cap hits. The trade ramifications would need a lot of work by both teams really working with the contracts that they're sending to the other team, and it would be very messy. So let's put that aside.
Yeah.
In a vacuum, at their age right now, with what they've done recently, would you make that trade?
Yeah, and I think the last part of what you said is the most important part of answering this question is what have you done for us lately? DeAndre Hopkins is a phenomenal wide receiver. He's probably a first ballot Hall of Famer with what he has been able to do in the 10 years that he's been in the NFL. Over 70 touchdowns, over 6 seasons of 1,000+ receiving yards. He's a 5-time Pro Bowler and a 3-time All-Pro winner. So he's obviously clearly phenomenal. But
including in 2020 too, a second-team All-Pro. So somewhat recently.
Right. Yeah. But the last 2 seasons, you've definitely seen a downward trajectory for DeAndre Hopkins. And, he's going into his age 31 season. So, you have to keep that into account. 42 and 64 catches, respectively, the last 2 seasons. That doesn't exactly bode well, especially for the type of game that he plays. So, and I understand Mike Williams, he plays a very physical style of game as well, but he's 29 years old. Yeah. And so that's so very important when you're considering these things. I feel like there's a couple more years of prime production that you can reach with Mike Williams, and I'm not sure if we're going to get that same just vintage version of DeAndre Hopkins for enough years to make it worth making that trade. So with that being said, I would not trade Mike Williams for DeAndre Hopkins straight up.
Maybe there's some bias, and we don't see DeAndre Hopkins every week, right? I mean, I have seen enough of him to know that he's still got plenty in the tank, and he still can be a very, very good receiver. But you are getting a receiver that's 2 years older, and you're getting a receiver that played 19 games over the last 2 years, when Mike Williams always gets hit with injury tags, and he has only he's played 29 games the last 2 seasons, right? This is what their stats are the last 2 years. 139 catches, 2,041 yards, and 13 touchdowns for Mike Williams. 106 catches, 1,289 yards, and 11 touchdowns, while averaging 12.1 yards per catch for DeAndre Hopkins. Mike Williams averaging over 14 yards per catch. They're different players. They have some of the same skill sets as far as both have ridiculous catch radiuses and have a knack for making spectacular catches. No doubt. DeAndre Hopkins not overly athletic, neither is Mike Williams, at least as far as like a speed and explosiveness standpoint. DeAndre Hopkins probably the better separator. Mike Williams, though, a little bit younger, a little bit less risk averse at this point, injury wise. I don't think you do it. I mean, I think you stick with Mike Williams. He is a special player, even if he has, kind of been pigeonholed into what his role is, where it's like the big plays he's going to make aren't going to be, on little dig routes or things like that, or, little outs and stuff. It's going to be big plays down the field, making spectacular.
He's going to be mossing guys. That's what Mike Williams does.
But that also leads to, more injuries and things like that when that is your style of play, you know? So I think that with these guys, it's close. And DeAndre Hopkins, hey, if he could reclaim what he was and he was an all-pro, you would rather have that on your team. But
Sure.
I think it's a big if for both of these guys. Mike Williams had a back injury last season that ended his season. Was going to almost try to play through it maybe the next week if they had gotten past Jacksonville. Either way, that's a big-time red flag, especially with his history of back injuries and things like that. They're both going to make a ridiculous amount of money. I think both of them at this point are somewhere around, top 25-ish, top 20 receivers, I would say. Somewhere along those lines. And I think that it's, a decent question for sure, but I think I would stick to what I know in this case with Mike Williams. But we have more questions, including about Kellen Moore and whether he could potentially take over for Brandon Staley, who might be entering the 2023 season on the hot seat. We're going to get into that after this, but first I need to tell you guys that this episode is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. You've heard me talk about this mobile game app, and if you've ever thought you'd make a good GM, you've got to give this game a try, because it's not as easy as you might think to create a dynasty. You have to really put the effort in, and it's nice because when you actually do put the effort into Ultimate Football GM, because it is such a challenging and realistic game world, you'll see the results if you do it right. If you don't do it right, you might need to scrap it and start again, because you'll learn a lot, especially about the kind of character players that you're going to be, bringing into your team, how much you're going to charge people for tickets, who you're going to draft, and how much of your free agency budget you want to spend, along with hiring the right coaches and coordinators, managing all the finances, including negotiating those player salaries, and navigating your franchise through all the big parts of the offseason, like free agency, the draft, and just even injuries throughout the season. But the nice thing is, since you listen to this show, you'll get a head start, because Locked On Chargers listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code Locked On, all caps, in the game store. That's Locked On in all caps, so make sure to check it out today. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the app stores. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. Let's get to some more Fan Mail Friday questions. This one is going to be from Hunter Miller, who asks, with Kellen Moore coming in and running the offense, is there a chance that if Kellen Moore and Herbert mesh really well, we could also possibly see Staley being let go and Kellen Moore becoming the head coach so that they would be able to stay together? I don't know if we've answered this, but we've gotten asked this a bunch of times on, Fan Mail Fridays and things like that. What do you think, David?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a pretty convoluted question, because I think Brandon Staley and Tom Telesco's fate are tied together. And I think that would impact whether or not Kellen Moore would be put in the position to where he would be like an interim head coach. Also, the Chargers don't really fire coaches in the middle of seasons, so it would be really hard for me to see that happening. But I feel like if the Chargers don't do what they need to do this season, that's get to the playoffs, win a playoff game, I feel like that might mean them firing Tom Telesco and firing the head coach, obviously Brandon Staley, and then with a new GM, he's more than likely going to want to bring in his own guy, which, might mean that, depending on how the offense does, and if they just incredibly outshine the defense, then it's possible. But there's just so many elements of this that would, really change what could possibly happen. It's just not something I see the Chargers doing, though.
It's not something many NFL teams do, right? Like,
Right.
When trying to search for this specific thing where you let that go, the head coach, and you just promote the offensive coordinator, I know it has happened before,
Yeah.
but it's extremely rare, because first of
Yeah.
all, if Herbert and Kellen Moore mesh really well, the Chargers are probably going to have a pretty good season, right?
Yes,
So are you
exactly.
going to fire Brandon Staley after a good season? Almost 100% no, right?
No.
If they have another good season and Kellen Moore is doing super well with Justin Herbert, he's much more likely to get a head coaching job somewhere else than he is for the Chargers to be like, hey, let me let go of Brandon Staley, right, and then bring up Kellen Moore.
Yeah.
The only way I could see it happening is the Chargers started like 0-5.
Yeah.
Brandon Staley gets fired. Kellen Moore gets promoted to head coach in an interim level. And then the Chargers, make a ridiculous run down the stretch of the season, almost make the playoffs or make the playoffs. And they say, okay, hey, we're sticking with Kellen Moore. That's pretty much the only way I could see it playing out, where that specific situation would kind of fall into place. But Bobby Wagner also has a question. Bobby Wagner, not to be confused with Bobby Wagner. Do you guys think Kellen Moore will be calling plays from the sideline or in the booth like Joe Lombardi did? Which do you prefer, David?
Well, we actually already know the answer to this question, because this information's already been put out there. But Kellen Moore will be calling plays from the sideline. That is something that's already been established. So he is going to be on the sideline. Think I actually do prefer it that way, just because you can have that intimate connection with your quarterback, with your offense. You can see what's going on with the players. You can communicate directly. You can draw up plays. You can see what's happening on the ground level, on the floor, on the field level. And I just think that is going to be a more effective way. And that's just how he's always done it. So that's what we are going to see on Sundays and Mondays and occasionally Thursdays with Kellen Moore.
It was a good question because there's different guys who do it differently, right? You see guys like Andy Reid and Kyle Shanahan who are on the sideline as head coaches, and they're calling plays, and they're obviously not having too hard of a time with it.
No.
But when Kyle Shanahan was an offensive coordinator, he used to do it from the booth, because at one point they started letting the people in the booth talk to the quarterback directly, which got rid of some of the communication issues. This is what Kellen Moore had to say about it when he decided he was doing that in Dallas when he first took over as their offensive coordinator. I like the sideline, just being able to interact with the players and talk to Dak. I think it'll be perfect. I think it'll be good. There's how he feels about it. I mean, part of that, I think, was Scott Linehan the year before was doing it from the booth and ended up getting fired, and he didn't want to do the same thing. But former Chargers offensive coordinator Ken Whisenant was actually asked about this a few years ago too, and this is what he had to say. I see the pluses and minuses to both. There isn't any question that you see more of the field from upstairs, but there isn't any question that you're more detached either. Thing that I like about being on the sideline is I can see, feel, hear. I can interact directly with the quarterback, see the look on his face when we are talking plays and strategy. That's a big thing. I've changed plays, changed the attack based on that during games. So benefits to both of it. I want him to do whatever he's most comfortable with. If that's him from the sideline, then it's him from the sideline, and I can get behind that. But we do have a question here from Superfan Zach, making it on the show. Hopefully you actually use my question after months of sending one in each week. I love you, Zach. Which player is currently on the roster needs to have the best season this upcoming season, in your opinion? So there's a lot of different ways you can kind of take that. It's kind of open-ended. To win a Super Bowl, right, for their own personal gain, contract year type of a stuff. David, where did you take it with this one?
Yeah, I mean, there's several guys that need to step up, and really have like resurgent seasons for themselves. Like guys like Kenneth Murray and Chris Rump. I mean, those are guys that, they're going into a contract year that can kind of, make themselves more valuable with their play. But as far as a guy that needs to have the best season, not only for the team, but for himself, it's Joey Bosa. And I don't think there's any other real legitimate answer for this other than that. He's coming into his age 28 season off of an injury-riddled season where, it didn't end, in the greatest of ways, whether that was on the field and with some of the actions that have happened off the field. For Joey Bosa, if he goes in this season and completely wrecks shop and is the Joey Bosa we know that he is capable of being, then he can completely rewrite and change the perception on how people view him, especially as one of the highest paid pass rushers in the NFL.
And when he signed it, the highest paid pass rusher in NFL history, the highest paid edge defender in history. With Joey Bosa, I think it's odd that the most sacks he's ever had in a season is 12.5, right? It just feels like it could be so much more than that.
Way more.
Even though he's had truly dominant seasons where, I mean, if you're going by the advanced statistics, right, he's up there with the very premier guys, almost all pro level numbers, especially when you factor in what he does against the run. He is such a good player. The Chargers would be so much better if they could really find his breakout season. It's crazy to say that for someone like that at this point, but the other thing is too is just justifying what his cap hit is going to be in 2024, which is going to be $35 million. If you're going to be paying that to that dude,
a Brinks truck full of money.
You want to know that you're getting kind of the results out of it. And even though I think he's been incredibly good during his career, he's already up there as far as the Chargers career sack leaders, right? Top 3 or 4 there. And just the eye test, seeing how good he plays when he's on the field, it just feels like there's more there. So I mean, definitely, I don't think we've seen him have that fully breakout season yet. If he can do what he's capable of, put up a 16 sack season, 15 plus sack season, I just still don't think that's out of the question for him. But at this point,
it's not.
It's now or never to me. As much as I say, hey, the Chargers need this dude to be good to kind of fulfill what they can fulfill, whatever their peak is defensively. I think we need to see it from him to validate everything.
And the fact of the matter is this, Daniel. The Chargers have 4 guys that have a cap hit of $30+ million. And one of them or more is more than likely not going to be on the team in 2024. So they better go out there and perform and show their value and show why they are making that kind of money.
It is what it is. At some point, you need to see kind of the raw numbers add up if you're going to pay someone the way they did, because they paid him thinking he might be about to have some of those seasons because the injury luck had been bad leading up to it. I know we had another voicemail about an athletic trainer, maybe getting him back on the field, keeping the maintenance up throughout the season. Maybe that's something that helps if the Chargers ever decide to actually hire a new athletic, person there, but athletic trainer. We know he can do it, but at some point you have to do it, or else you're just kind of speaking into the void. He has to actually be that player to be considered that player. His brother's passed him. He's not really talked about in the same air as the elite edge rushers around the NFL. He could put himself back into that conversation, but he just needs to get healthy, man. I mean, I don't know how much he's going to want to do this anymore.
He's literally 27 years old, going into his year 28
His body's
season.
not young, though, and that's the hard
that's
part,
for sure.
Right? I mean, he's been through a lot more injuries than most guys have at this point in their career,
Yeah.
so you just wonder how long he's going to keep trying to be able to push through these rehabs and keep getting surgeries and things like that.
Yeah, the Andrew Luck effect, right? Yeah.
Totally. I mean, his dad got first-round pick, thought of as a bust because he got injured and, didn't come back. He can do it, but I want to see him mentioned with his brother. I want it to be competitive between
That's what I
want to
see, too.
I would love to see it, because right now it's not even a conversation, because one of those bosses has been much better than the other one. But we have more questions to get into, including what we think the role would be for Dalton Kincaid if he could be a bust and not be able to even get on the field, and if we would double dip at the tight end position, just like we've talked about double dipping at wide receiver, as well as some behind the scenes as to what goes into the podcast on a day-to-day basis, coming up right after this. We have more fan mail questions to get into, but thank you guys, as always, for making us your first listen. And the everydayers, just want to let you guys know that Monday, 6th round Chargers next mock draft Monday will be the 6th rounder. The Monday after that is going to be, you guessed it, the 7-round full mock draft, the week of the draft, and getting into our favorite players that we hope the Chargers come away with and our final predictions for that. But next week, we're going to be focusing in on mock draft there, getting into the biggest positions the Chargers could target, looking at the edge rushers and our favorites there, looking at the favorite receivers that we have going into this draft class and see if the Chargers can end up with one of them. But back to Fan Mail Friday here, and a question from Ryan Kensinger, who asks, is there any chance that Dalton Kincaid turns out like Mike Gesicki player, where he can't get on the field because of his subpar blocking? So to me, David, I think the main difference here is one thing specifically. The Chargers at least kind of know what they have, or know what they're getting from a blocking perspective if they were to take Dalton Kincaid. Whereas Mike Gesicki was drafted by a different regime, got a new head coach in Kyle Shanahan, who ran a totally different offense. Yeah. And then he got phased out as not really one of his guys. So I think it's a very, very different situation.
It definitely is. And I mean, it's not that Dalton Kincaid cannot block. I mean, he's definitely willing to block. And I feel like there are some aspects of his game from a blocking perspective that are decent. But make no mistake, he is a dangerous pass catching tight end. And that's the reason why he will be on the football field. And like you said, when they bring him into the building, they know exactly what he is capable of doing and what they're bringing him in to do, which is to be a yak threat, which is to be a guy that's going to get extra yards whenever you get the ball in his hands and be another weapon for your quarterback. That's what you're bringing Dalton Kincaid in to do. If you are mischaracterizing him as a guy that's going to be a complete tight end, then you are not looking or evaluating Dalton Kincaid in the right way.
Another thing is, a lot of tight ends in the NFL are bad at blocking. There are plenty of guys out there that are used specifically for their mismatches in the passing game. And, I mean, even look at Mike Gesicki specifically. Got a pretty big deal from the Patriots, right? Yep. I mean, a very run-heavy team. Yep. And they're going to find a way to use him, or at least attempt to, right? And they still have Hunter Henry over there, too. But they went out and got a guy. I think it's just you don't want to have all of one type of guy. And I think that's the one problem with Dalton Kincaid is you're pairing him with Gerald Everett, and you're pairing him with Donald Parham, and you're pairing him with Trey McCoy.
Right.
None of those guys at this point have shown they can be consistently good blockers or be a consistent inline blocker that you can use, equally effective in the passing game and the running game. They don't have that. Yeah. Which I think leads us to the next question here from Tim on Instagram, who asks, just wondering, could the Chargers double dip at tight end this year because of Coach Moore and because we still don't know about Trey McCoy? We kind of know about Trey McCoy. It's not good.
Yeah.
So for this to happen, we've talked about it with wide receiver, and it makes sense because the Chargers, could use a return man as well. That could be a receiver as well as just, wide receiver 4.
Yeah.
Whatever that speed kind of role is for the Chargers. Tight end, it would make them have to get rid of Trey McCoy if they brought in 2 tight ends. Not totally against it, but I think it's much less likely than us seeing it at wide receiver, even though I think the thought process is right there. Hey, maybe you get a Dalton Kincaid and then pair him with somebody later on in the draft who's more of a blocking specialist.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's something that's likely. I think a more likely situation is them taking a tight end and then maybe making it a priority to get one of those priority undrafted free agent tight ends that they want to bring in.
Yeah.
Someone who can try to, make the roster in that blocking capacity. I just don't know if you can just really divert and devote 2 draft picks to that specific position, because there are other things that you need to accomplish in this draft, and you only got so many picks to get the job done.
And it feels like they're going to ride it out to some extent with Trey McCoy and, you know, just kind of put him on the, hey, everyone develops differently and at different speeds. And we've seen that. I mean, Louis Gilman just had his first, decent season last year, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Drew Tranquil will have his best season. Kazir White had his best season a couple of seasons ago. Both of them, all in their 4th seasons, right?
Trey Pipkins,
same boat. Everyone comes along at different times. The problem is you don't have time to wait. And if you spend another year trying to figure it out with Trey McCoy, it's another year down the drain where you probably don't have someone that would realistically fit well with what Kellen Moore wants to do. If he was a good blocker, he would. If he brought some more receiving chops and had decent blocking, he would. We just haven't seen that. So I don't think it's unfair to think, hey, bring in competition for this dude, because you can't just have another warm body on the roster. You can't have another year of seeing what you have in Trey McCoy as tight end 3 when the guy in front of him, Donald Parham, has had the injury history that he's had. You just can't risk it. You can't put your eggs in that basket. You have to find somebody else, 1 or 2 players. And I think a lot of it depends on how they feel about Stone Smart as well, because he's another. It seems like
he's a guy they're high. Exactly, I was going to say that.
But another guy who's not an inline blocker either, though.
No,
so
right.
maybe
Another
higher in Joe Lombardi's kind of system than he would be potentially.
Which, hey, it might make a guy like Michael Mayer more likely to be the pick, because he is much more of a blocking tight end that, has some receiving chops as well. So I don't know. We'll see.
I think he absolutely is the more likely of the 2 of them to get drafted for the Chargers if he's there.
Yep.
It doesn't mean it would be my preference, but I get it more than I did once, and I could make myself happy about it.
Yeah.
But I bet you guys all wonder how this show comes together, and probably just think that we just show up and talk for 30 minutes, and then it's over. But that's not kind of how it works, and Bill wants to know the nitty-gritty behind the scenes of the Locked On Chargers podcast.
Gentlemen, my name is Bill. I'm from California. I've been a long-time San Diego Chargers fan. God, longer than I probably should even mention. However, I want to know, how do you guys prep for the show? What days do you guys actually record, and when do you release? Because you guys do a great job, and I want to shout out to you guys in the off-season for keeping us up to date every single day. Thank you very much. Let's go Bolts. We got it this year. It's going to happen. Rock on, boys.
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate you saying that always. It is a lot of work. Let me tell you, there's a lot of long nights. As we're recording this right now, getting to your first part of it, it's 1:48 a.m. where David lives in Texas right now. It's 11:48 p.m. for me. Sunday through Thursday normally is how we release it. Late the night before, releasing him at 6 a.m. or earlier the next day is how it usually goes. But David, it's a good question, because I think there is a lot more that kind of goes into it than what people see from the outside.
Well, it's just constant communication. I mean, we're constantly trying to create content for this show. We're always talking. We're always trying to formulate how we're going to break down what we're going to put together for the show. And then it's doing the research and doing the notes and putting that together. I mean, I would say on average, I spend at least 2 to 3 hours a night preparing to do this show. And then when we get on, we start talking about it, make sure we're on the same page with how we're going to execute the show. And then we perform the show after that. But it's a lot more than just showing up, putting the lights on and hitting record. I mean, if you want to put together a good product and you want people to actually listen to you and believe what you're having to say, you have to put the work in so that it shows up when you do record.
Yeah, I agree with that. It depends for what show it is, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if we're doing a mock draft Monday like we did this week, I can tell you that I did like 7 hours of film watching.
Yeah,
on
about 5
Sunday
or 6 hours for
and
me. Yeah.
discarded, 4 or 5 guys along the way that I thought about using, just because that's kind of how it goes sometimes. But
Yep.
on the average, for the average show, this is what it looks like for me on my side of it here. I mean, usually, for a lot of it is stressing out over what we're going to talk about, especially this time of the year. Like,
Yeah.
so much of it is like, oh my God, 5 shows a week. We're committed to bringing this to you guys. What in the world are we going to talk about that we haven't talked about in the offseason? And I think we pride ourselves in being able to, every offseason, we've gone a little bit better where we're trying to bring you guys as fresh of content as we always can, bring you good guests and stuff like that. But
Yes.
every 30-minute show that we have, I'm probably spending, on average, 5 to 6 hours a day for a 30-minute show. I mean, I usually do, 2 hours of prep time, 3 hours sometimes, not including just the time talking about what the show is going to be.
Right,
Me
which
and
is pretty
David
much
usually
throughout the day, every day. Yeah.
Sure, yeah. I mean, and plus after I get home from work from, our day jobs. But
Yes.
me and David usually have a 20 to 30-minute pre-show meeting before every show, basically, right? And getting on and then talk about how the show is going to go. And then we do the show 30 minutes, 40 minutes, whatever. And then after that, it's, 1 to 2 hours of editing, uploading, coming up with the title, coming up with the description, coming up with the tags, making thumbnails, publishing it, promoting it. Like, it's a lot. I love it, or we wouldn't be here,
course.
but there's a ton that goes in behind the scenes. So very, very much appreciate that, Bill. I appreciate you for calling into the show. And anyone who called into the voicemail line, you guys can always hit us up at 323-524-7924. We weren't able to get into all of them. Lots of good questions, a lot of content that you guys wanted us to get into. But we appreciate everyone who hit us up and checked out today's show and made us your first listen as always. And make sure you guys are back here next week, because the draft coverage is only going to heat up. Our eyes are only going to bleed a little bit more as we keep watching these prospects and go through the black market just to even find the places to watch these prospects, because that's another incredibly hard part of it. But we're going to be getting into not only a 6th-round mock draft, and we'll have completely different mock drafts. That might be 2 shows next week, before getting into just the positions we think the Chargers need the most, breaking down which wide receivers we like the most in the upcoming draft, breaking down which edge rushers we like the most in the upcoming draft. So a lot of draft coverage coming to you guys next week, and a lot of us stamping our favorites on some of the guys that we think the Chargers could go along with. It's going to heat up. Make sure you guys are here for it, and to make sure you don't miss it, make sure you are subscribing or following for free on YouTube, or listening to the show wherever you get your podcast from. You can also find this show every day on all of our social media. Thank you to everyone who hit us up on Twitter at LockedOnLAC. You can also find me on Twitter at DanTalkSports and David Drogemeyer on Twitter at DroTalkSD. You can also find us on Instagram at LockedOnChargers. Shout out to my wife for running that Instagram account. And also, you can find us on our Locked On Chargers Facebook page as well. We will be back with you guys on Monday. Mock Draft 6.0, 6 rounds. So excited. Until then, guys, take it easy and go Bolts.